Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Albert Owen. Number one, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Albert Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In April 2010, I agreed with the Prime Minister and Nick that VAT was a regressive tax. Indeed, the Prime Minister went further and said it was far more regressive than income tax. He went on to break his pledge to the British people and hiked VAT up to 20%. Can I give him an opportunity to restore his credibility on VAT and ask him to rule it out completely to pay for any future income tax cuts?
Well, our plans don't involve putting up taxes. What they involve is continuing to grow our economy and create jobs. And I'm sure he will be pleased to know that in terms of the long-term economic plan, a new statistic has come out today, which is we used to say there were 400,000 new businesses in Britain. I can now tell the House that since 2010, there are 760,000 new businesses in Britain.
And Maine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend share my concern that the one topic not being discussed today is in the opposition debate is the Welsh Health Service? Sadly, my mother died. My mother died under the Welsh Health Service, and it was an inquest revealed that ambulances routinely had kit that hadn't been checked and had things that had been left out of them. Does he share my concern? It's taken the death of another person in Wales to get a change to this service.
I think my honourable friend makes an important point, which is there's a debate on Wales in the House today, but not a debate about the health service in Wales, which we should have a debate about, because in Wales they made the decision to cut the NHS budget rather to increase it as we've done in England. They haven't met an NHS target on cancer or waiting times since 2008. The NHS in Wales is in trouble, and that's not because of hard-working doctors and nurses, but because of a Labour administration that cut the NHS and has failed to reform it.
Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, everyone was appalled by the abuse of people with learning disabilities at Winterbourne View. It is a basic obligation of a civilised society to treat everyone, particularly the most vulnerable, with respect and dignity. Now, a couple of years ago, the government set the aim of moving people into the community and out of these assessment and treatment units. Today's report shows it hasn't happened. Can we today, across the House, reaffirm this aim?
We should absolutely reaffirm that aim, and anyone who watched the television programme on Winterbourne View, like me, would have been absolutely shocked about the way people with learning disabilities are treated, and everybody knows this has been a problem for years and decades, not for a few months, that we've got to do more to get people out of hospitals and into loving and caring homes in the community. The reason that we commissioned this report from Sir Stephen Bubb, and it's an excellent report, is because the commitment to get all the people out of the hospitals hadn't been met. And what Sir Stephen has done, I think, is come up with good ideas for how we bring together the health service and local authorities to make sure that people with learning disabilities are treated with respect.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for that answer, but there are still more people with learning disabilities moving into institutional care than moving out of institutional care, taking them away from their families and friends. Can he promise today that there will be a clear timetable so that the promises made to people with learning disabilities and their families are kept?
Minister.
I don't want to set out a timetable that it isn't possible to meet. We've just received this report from Stephen Bubb, and to be fair to him, what he says very clearly, it's unfair to blame the government. I think it's been a system failing, and I'm very keen not to put the blame anywhere. I'm very keen that we move on, and indeed we should move on and plan properly how we commission care and how we commission places in the community using local authorities as well as the NHS, and we respond to this report in good time. Otherwise, we'll make the same mistake again.
Miliband.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope he will take the report away and consider setting out a timetable, because a promise was made, and this is about the future and doing right by people with learning disabilities and their families. I want to turn to the wider issue of the NHS, Mr. Speaker. We saw a report this week of a patient waiting 35 hours in A&E. And across England, A&Es including Scunthorpe, Middlesbrough and Kings Lynn are telling patients not to turn up. And we've seen report after report of patients waiting hours for ambulances. Does this represent more than some isolated incidents, but actually shows an NHS in England at breaking point?
What the figures show is, yes, the NHS is under pressure, and the figures are these. Last week, 429,000 people presented at accident and emergency units across England. That is 3,000 more patients every day than under the last government. So that's what's happened, is a big increase in accident and emergency admissions. Now, the target, as he knows, is to see 95% within 4 hours. The running total for this year is 94.7%, so 0.3% below what we are meant to achieve. Now, the key thing is, what are we going to do to respond to these problems in A&E? What we are doing is putting £700 million more into the NHS this year. Now, we're only able to do that because we have a strong and growing economy, and that is the key. You can only have a strong NHS if you have a strong economy.
Speaker, the truth is that the crisis in A&E is a symptom of the crisis in elderly care and in relation to getting to see a GP. Now it's the case that one of the biggest problems is that 1 in 4 people are unable to get to see a GP within a week. And we even heard yesterday from the Health Secretary that this is a problem. Mr. Speaker, what does it say about the NHS when the Health Secretary says he goes to A&E because he can't get a GP appointment?
Yet again, he comes to this House and raises a problem that he created. Yes, it was the Labour Party's GP's contract. After that happened, 90% of doctors opted out of out-of-hours care. That is why we are putting in place arrangements for 7-day opening for GPs. Already 7 million people have access to that. But I repeat, if you can't run the economy, you can't run the NHS, and he couldn't run either.
The truth is, we introduced evening and weekend opening. He cut it. We opened walk-in centres. He shut them. And he promised to improve GP access, and he hasn't delivered it. And it's happening on his watch. And today, Mr. Speaker, the King's Fund says that without an emergency injection of resources, the NHS is going to face financial meltdown. This is exactly the same pattern that we saw under the last Tory government. Winter crisis followed by emergency bailouts. Isn't it a damning indictment of his record on the NHS that we are back to those days?
What we have with the NHS is this government putting £12.7 billion more into the NHS. That's why we've got 1,200 more nurses, 8,000 more doctors, and patients are being treated with greater care. But the real point is this. He famously forgot to mention the deficit. And we know what happens when you forget about the deficit. Look what happened to healthcare spending in Portugal, cut by 17%. Look what happened to healthcare spending in Greece, cut by 14%. He can't run the economy, he can't run the NHS, he's got no plan for either.
I'll tell him what's happening. Deficits are rising right across the NHS because of his mismanagement, his top-down reorganisation that nobody wanted and nobody voted for. And he's turned the NHS from a service that was succeeding to a service in crisis. And it is a crisis of his making. He closed the walk-in centres. He introduced the top-down reorganisation. He cancelled the GP target so people could get in to see their general practitioner. He's broken his promises. Only a Labour government can save the National Health Service.
What he forgets is when we put £12.7 billion into the NHS, his shadow health secretary said it was irresponsible. It's only because we've safeguarded the economy that we can safeguard the NHS. The fact is, he forgets the deficit, his shadow health secretary forgets mid-staffs, and both of them have forgotten you only get a strong health service with a strong economy.
Dr. John Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Incinerator, a manufacturing company in my constituency, provide portable incinerators to the United Nations. That's crucial and vital in addressing the issue of Ebola. They're now offering to donate a further £200,000 worth of equipment if the government will match it. Will the government consider this proposal?
I certainly look at the proposal that he makes. After all, we backed the Ebola fundraising that was very effective in that excellent England-Scotland International, which raised a serious amount of money for Ebola. And also, we also acted on the Band-Aid single, so we'll have a very close look at what he says.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, a recent report by the respected charity, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, found that his unfair tax and benefit changes had resulted in the poorest half of households losing out, whilst the top 1% had seen their incomes rocket. That makes me feel extremely angry. What does it make the Prime Minister feel?
Well, I've studied this report very carefully, and what, of course, it says is that the rise in adult poverty that this report outlines actually occurred on Labour's watch. Yeah. Since the election, we've seen 600,000 fewer people in relative poverty, 670,000 fewer workless households, 300,000 fewer children in poverty. But the other point about this report, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the House will want to hear this, is that the report only covers the income figures up to the period of April 2013. And the report says, and I quote directly, "Since the middle of last year, there have been huge increases in employment, which surely impact on incomes and the risks of poverty." That's absolutely right.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, we're very proud of local boy Lewis Hamilton. Would the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Lewis, congratulating Ross Brawn, who helped to design the car, and Mercedes, of course? And does he agree with me that the British motor racing industry not only gives us a lot of entertainment, but it also gives us jobs, engineering skills, and British business success?
I certainly join my honourable friend in praising Lewis Hamilton. He's a young man with nerves of steel, huge ability, and I think he made everyone in our country proud. But my honourable friend is right. We shouldn't just be proud of the drivers, we should be proud of the industry, because the fact is all 19 of the Formula One races last year were won by British-built cars. This is an enormous industry for our country. There are 43,000 people employed in Oxfordshire alone in this industry, and it's also worth remembering it's not just Formula One. I had a reception at number 10 Downing Street for the whole motorsport industry, and it's very important to remember that goes all the way from go-karting up to Formula One, and Lewis Hamilton started off in a go-kart.
Dr. Roberta Blackman-Woods.
We don't call it. Recent figures from the ONS show that real wages have fallen up to 9% in recent years, with 2/3 of those who got work last year earning less than the living wage. This is leading to extensive in-work poverty, especially in areas like the North East that already have lower incomes. How can the Prime Minister say that we are all in this together, and what's he going to do to tackle the issue?
First of all, what we're going to do about it is go on growing the economy, creating jobs, and crucially cutting people's taxes. Because the best way to help with this issue is to do what we've done, which is to lift 3 million of the lowest paid people out of poverty altogether, and to cut taxes for 26 million more. But what the figures show is actually 2/3 of the jobs that we've created have been full-time jobs, not part-time jobs. The long-term economic plan is working.
Sir Edward Garnier.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, a 92-bed hospital in Kerry Town in Sierra Leone was completed at a cost of £2 million to the British taxpayer. That is a good thing. As of last night, it was looking after 5 patients. It is run by Save the Children. Would my right honourable friend have a word with the Secretary of State for International Development and others in government to make sure that that hospital is made proper use of?
Right honourable friend is absolutely right. It's good that it has been built and built roughly on time, but there is an issue about its operation and the work we're doing with Save the Children, and we're working with them intensively to make sure that the hospital reaches its full capacity and its full use. Because as well as that facility, we're building other facilities across Sierra Leone and, of course, community centres as well, because we need all these facilities to bring Ebola under control.
Pete Wishart.
Prime Minister, we're living in the early days
of a UKIP UK, where Farage and company pull all the strings to this House. Pandering to UKIP has been a disaster for the Prime Minister and the Tory party. Just one cursory look at the opinion polls will show that. Isn't it time to stand up to his pernicious agenda, to take him on? My country might be dragged out of Europe against its will because of this UKIPification. How could that possibly be right?
I'd say there's something that his party and the UKIP have in common, which is they seek to divide people. We stand for the United Kingdom and bringing people together.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We can all agree.
I welcome the Prime Minister's strong support for protecting funding for the NHS and also the drive towards efficiency in Dorset. But the needs are great, particularly for children's mental health services, for adults in crisis and social care. Will the Prime Minister give his support to additional resources for the NHS and social care in the forthcoming autumn statement?
Well, my honourable friend will obviously have to wait for the Chancellor and his autumn statement. But as I said a moment ago, we have been able to put more money into the NHS and to make sure that the NHS and social care are working better together, for instance, with our Better Care Fund, because we have a strong economy that can deliver those resources. And I'm absolutely committed to making sure we safeguard and improve our NHS, and that means everything to do with our NHS, including, of course, mental health, which she mentioned.
Sir Gerald Kaufman.
Will the Prime Minister condemn the new Israeli government bill, which removes what are defined as national rights from all Israeli citizens who are not Jews, makes Hebrew the only national language, and has been denounced by the Israeli Attorney General as causing a deterioration in the democratic character of the state? Will he make clear that statutory repressive removal of citizenship rights on the basis of religion will turn Israel into an apartheid state?
What I'd say to the right honourable gentleman is this, that one of the reasons I'm such a strong supporter of Israel is that it is a country that has given rights and democracy to its people. And it's very important that that continues. When you look across the region and you look at those indexes of freedom, you see that Israel is one of the few countries that actually ticks the boxes in terms of freedom, and it's very important it continues to do so.
Norman Baker.
The Prime Minister, I'm sure, will share my enthusiasm that E.ON has confirmed this week that 300 jobs are being created to build and construct and maintain a new offshore wind farm. Many jobs in my constituency in New Haven. Does this not prove that doing the right thing for the environment is also doing the right thing for the economy? And will he condemn those people in UKIP and elsewhere whose anti-green rhetoric would destroy green jobs?
Well, I think what you've seen under this government, and of which until recently he was a part, is that we have seen consistent levels of investment into green energy, which is producing jobs in our country. Obviously, it's welcome what's happening in New Haven, but it's also very welcome what's happening on the Humber Estuary and in Hull in terms of the large Siemens investment, which is not just about making wind turbines, but is also going to be a huge, involve a huge supply industry around it as well.
Khalid Mahmood.
On Saturday, I attended the service at the Birmingham Cathedral, along with the families of those that lost loved ones in the 1974 bomb bombings. They're all aggrieved after a 40-year-long wait. There's still no action to bring to justice the perpetrators of that action. Will he confirm what action he's going to take?
Well, first of all, our sympathies and condolences should still go to those people who lost their relatives 40 years ago. When you lose a relative, that stays with you, and the grief and the pain stays with you forever. I think it is important that we continue to work to try and make sure that we address all the issues that happened in the past and find those that are responsible and try to help people come to terms with what has happened. And that needs to happen in Northern Ireland as well as on the mainland.
Nadeem Zahawi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When I see a white van, Mr. Speaker, I think of the small business owner who works long hours to put food on the family table. When I see the Cross of St. George, I think of the words of my constituent, William Shakespeare. This blessed plot, this blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England? Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we shouldn't sneer at people who work hard, who are patriotic and who love their country?
I agree with... I agree with every word. I agree with every word my honourable friend has said. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I was wondering why the Labour benches were so quiet, and now I realise, of course, the Shadow Attorney General, who normally makes so much noise, presumably isn't here today, but probably out taking pictures of people's homes, I expect. But we know what that meant about the modern Labour Party, sneering at people who work hard and love their country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell the House how much taxpayers' money his government spent challenging the EU cap on bankers' bonuses before it was abandoned last week? Has he learned nothing from Rochester and Clapton? And isn't UKIP right? Even UKIP was against increases in the bankers' bonuses.
Prime Minister.
We were taking the same approach as that was advised by the Governor of the Bank of England and by all the experts who advised us in that position. And I think it is important to stand up to Brussels and to challenge when you think they've got it wrong.
Andrew Rosendale.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that areas such as Romford and the London Borough of Havering, with a high concentration of older people, will be substantially hit by the financial implications of the Care Act? Will he meet with me and a delegation to look at a more equitable funding arrangement for older people?
Well, I will make sure that my honourable friend has a meeting either with me or with the Health Secretary to discuss this issue. I think it is important. The Care Act makes some very important breakthroughs in terms of providing care for people and making sure there is quality care for people. Also, what I'd add to him is if he does have a high concentration of older people in his constituency, obviously they will welcome the fact that by next year the basic state pension will be £950 higher than when we came to government in 2010.
Carl Turner.
Does the Prime Minister think it's right to give Serco a £70 million contract when there are questions around its handling of Jarl's Wood and allegations of serious abuse and sexual violence? Does he not agree that a full independent inquiry into these allegations should have been carried out before his Home Secretary signed off on that contract?
I think it's very important when these contracts have gone wrong, and he's right, in some cases they have gone wrong, that this is properly looked at, investigated, and lessons are learned. And on occasion we've made sure that serious amounts of money has been recovered from the companies concerned. But what I think we shouldn't do is use one or two bad contracts to fulfil the trade union's dream of ending all contracts altogether.
Mark Menzies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his government designating Wharton in my constituency as an enterprise zone. But can I ask the Prime Minister what steps his government is taking to ensure that Wharton is the most attractive inward investment zone for advanced manufacturing inward investment?
Well, I think I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for what he says about Wharton. I think the enterprise zones now are all up and running, all working well. They've created over 12,500 jobs, got 434 different businesses coming into the enterprise zones. I think making sure they succeed means we've got to market them even better, using UKTI and its resources both here and around the world. And in terms of advanced manufacturing, I think promoting to companies the tax rates we have, the patent box, the support of the catapult institutes up and down the country to support advanced manufacturing. If we bring all those things together, it's absolutely clear to me there is no better place to invest in Europe right now than coming to invest in Britain.
Jamie Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first thing I see when I think of when I see a white van is whether or not it's my father or my brother driving it. But the national... Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The National Audit Office has revealed that 40% of cuts to councils in England have been made at the expense of adult social care. The consequences of this upon the NHS are obvious. This is the Prime Minister's disaster. Can he tell the House today what is the cost of this failure?
Well, first of all, let me say to him, if he values people who work hard, who want to get on, he ought to cross the floor and come over here. Very good. Now, on this issue of social care, what we have done is introduce the Better Care Fund, which has taken money and pooled it between NHS and social services to make sure that they can work together. It's absolutely vital that we do that, and I'm sure he's working in his local area to make sure that happens.
Sir Newton.
The Royal Auxiliary Fleet ship Argos is currently off Sierra Leone fighting the war against Ebola, saving lives there and keeping us safe at home. Will my right honourable friend join me in thanking the crew and their families for their service and their sacrifice now and over Christmas?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, because RAF Argus is often based in Falmouth. RFA Argus is often based in Falmouth, and they are doing an amazing job, and they're doing an amazing job at some personal risk to themselves. But I think it's absolutely essential that Britain takes this leading role in Sierra Leone and inserts not just the hospital beds and the staff, but also the training and the logistics that is going to be essential in turning around this crisis. And having RFA Argus there with all its expertise and ability is an absolute key part of that.
Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the closure of Hammersmith and Central Middlesex A&E departments in September, West London now has some of the worst waiting times for A&E in the country. But last week, NHS England told the Evening Standard that Charing Cross A&E would be replaced with an emergency centre run by GPs and nurses. Will the Prime Minister abandon any further cuts to A&E services in West London?
But what the honourable gentleman should know is not only are we recruiting more A&E consultants and nurses in North West London, not only are Northwick Park and Ealing Hospital getting more beds, but both Hammersmith and Central Middlesex hospitals have GP-led urgent care centres on site that are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So instead of trying to frighten his constituents, he should be talking about the investment going into the local health service.
Simon Kirby.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister won't be surprised that I will be marking World AIDS Day on Monday in Brighton, but will he join me in encouraging people this week, National HIV Testing Week, to come forward and have regular tests?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. Obviously, this government is pioneering the idea of free tests. We think that's very important, and we need to tackle HIV and AIDS not just here in our country but around the world, and that's also why we put so much money into antiretroviral drugs.
Phil Wilson.
Can the Prime Minister envisage any circumstances in which he would lead the No campaign in an EU referendum?
Well, I've set out unlike the party opposite, I've set out what I want to achieve, which is a renegotiation and then a referendum. And I think Britain is better off inside a reformed European Union. But I have to ask them, what is it they're frightened of? We say, trust the people and let the people decide.
Mr. Alan Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Royal Mail's universal service obligation, that is, delivering mail to every premises in the country and collecting mail from every post box 6 days a week, is vitally important. Will the Prime Minister give an assurance that he will never allow this universal service obligation to be watered down in any way, and so support Red Van Man?
I know how important the universal service obligation is, particularly in constituencies like my honourable friends that includes so many islands and so many far-flung communities, and it's very important it's maintained.
Mark Reckless.
I am grateful to the Prime Minister. I am grateful to the Prime Minister.
Order. A parliament believes, if it believes in anything, in free speech. I don't need the heckling. It's tedious. It's low grade. The honourable gentleman will be heard however long it takes. It's as simple as that. Mark Reckless. What do you mean?
grateful to the Prime Minister for spending so much time in Rochester and Strood. Dr. Philip Barnes, Acting Chief Executive of Medway Hospital, said this morning that what our hospital needs is a period of patience and stability. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Prime Minister.
I agree. It does need those things, but it also needs the attention that the special measures that Medway is in will bring about. And what we've seen is extra A&E consultants and nurses going in, 112 additional nurses, 61 more doctors. But it will take time to turn round a hospital that did have very high rates of mortality and still has challenges. The only thing I fail to understand is why he's decided to join a party that doesn't believe in the NHS and wants to break it up.
In 1971, the very first refuge in the world was set up in Chiswick in my constituency. The Home Secretary yesterday announced a £10 million to refugees across this country for much-needed investment. Would my right honourable friend join with me in calling for an end of domestic abuse right across this country?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We need action against domestic abuse on every front. We have passed new legislation. We have improved the training to the police. But crucially, I think these refuges are important, and that's why the announcements that we've made about separate and discrete funding are so important.
Pamela Nash.
I really appreciate what the Prime Minister said earlier about the investment from the government in antiretrovirals, and I commend them for the investment in the Global Fund. But I'd ask the House to remember today that 76% of children living with HIV in the world do not receive medication, largely because there's no research and development incentive to make those medications available. We've seen at our peril that the lack of investment in neglected diseases such as Ebola risks the health of everyone in the world. Can I ask the Prime Minister what he will do to encourage investment in neglected diseases?
Well, first of all, I very much agree with what she said about the Global Fund. I think it's been an excellent way of getting countries around the world to make their contributions, and Britain has been no slouch in doing that, and we've been a major funder of the Global Fund. I think in terms of how we tackle diseases and pandemics and problems in our world, I do think we have to have a serious look at the World Health Organization. It is the body under the ambit of the UN that ought to be able to respond and respond more rapidly, but it's an organisation badly in need of reform. And as I've said in this House before, I think we need to look at how we pool resources so we can act more quickly, but part of that should also be reforming particularly the regional aspects of the WHO, which is not fit for purpose.
Andrew Turner.
Does my right honourable friend believe that Tony Blair should get a Global Legacy Award from Save the Children for taking us to war unnecessarily in Iraq?
Minister.
The remarkable thing about this award is that Tony Blair got it from someone who used to work for Gordon Brown. So, obviously, the person who gave the award knows about peacemaking and peacekeeping, but I think it's not for me to get involved.
Jack Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, in 2010, the Prime Minister promised to protect the front line. Yet, in the biggest police cuts in Europe, our police service is facing the loss of 30,000 officers, over half from the front line, and threatening, in the words of the Association of Chief Police Officers, their ability to perform their statutory functions and protect the vulnerable. Does the Prime Minister understand the concern being expressed in communities all over the country at the systematic undermining by his government of the bedrock of policing, local policing, neighbourhood policing?
I don't accept what he says because, look, we have made difficult decisions about police budgets. We had to cut those budgets by 20%. But at the same time as doing that, what we've seen is crime has actually fallen in this country, whether you measure it by the National Crime Survey or by the reported figures to the police. On both counts, crime has come down. The other thing that's happened is because the police have done such a magnificent job at reform and efficiency, the percentage of officers on the front line has actually gone up.
Not least Jason McCartney.
Every hour, one man dies from prostate cancer in the UK. Testicular cancer is now the most common cancer in men aged 25 to 49 in the UK. And on average, every day, 12 men in the UK die from suicide. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating all the men who have taken part in the Movember campaign to raise these men's health issues, and will the government continue to fund them and support these vital men's health issues?
I certainly join my honourable friend in praising all those who've taken place in Movember. He's sporting a pretty magnificent specimen. I have to say, my honourable friend next to him looks like he's about to star in a Cheech and Chong movie. It is absolutely remarkable, and I'm sure that in terms of my protection team, they have done incredible work and they're raising a lot of money. I'm only sorry that I can't seem to be able to join you. But the causes are important, particularly these cancers that really need to raise awareness, improve treatments and save lives.
Order.